بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المرسلين رحمة للعالمين نبينا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Respected sisters and elders, today is the 12th of the Hajj, the year 1444. 1434 years ago, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was performing Hajj, and that was his farewell pilgrimage. And in this farewell pilgrimage, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he imparted many different advices. And this Hajj, just to give you an idea of what this Hajj was, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about 20 years ago, prior to that Hajj, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was given nubuwwah, he was granted prophethood. And so for about 20 years, he was giving da'wah. Initial few years, he had few responses. Eventually, at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam conquering Makkah, he had about 10,000 Sahaba. It's about the 8th Hijri. In the 10th Hijri, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he comes 23 years after prophethood. He comes and he's bringing 100,000 people with him. And they all, can you imagine? 100,000 people within 23 years. Rasulullah amassed this. And he gathered everyone, and they're all at Hajj. And now Rasulullah understands that this is possibly one of the last moments with such a congregation. So in a beautiful hadith, a very emotional hadith, he says, Rasulullah he says, you should all take the rules of Hajj, you should all take all these ahkam of Hajj. فإني لا أدري لعلي لا أحج بعد حجتي هذه. So he says that you should all take your manasik, you should all take your ahkam of Hajj, for I don't know if I will be with you next year for Hajj. So he knows that this will be his last moments. And Rasulullah after the day of Arafah, which was the 9th of the Hajj, he passed away 81 days after that. So we know that Rasulullah he survived for less than 3 months after this Hajjatul Wida. So we understand that this was such an important moment in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the life of the Prophethood, and then in the life of Islam, of course. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's speaking to people, one of his last few sermons. And we know that after this, no ahkam will reveal. After this, right, this is the time where Allah Ta'ala said, that today I have perfected your religion, I have perfected my favors upon you, and I'm happy with Islam as a religion for you. So this was that day of Arafah. So now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, amongst 100,000 Sahaba, after 23 years of da'wah, can you imagine in the initial stages of Islam, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would speak to the Sahaba and he would give them glad tidings, he would tell them, and listen, every single house and Islam will enter every single house. And they will either accept it or they will reject it. And he's telling a few people this. Now 100,000 Sahaba are around him. They're all doing Hajj. Now you can imagine how emotional Rasulullah must have been. And of course, there are no loudspeakers or anything. But Rasulullah he was going around and he was giving advices. He kept giving advices throughout the entire journey. He was giving advices. And so today I felt, today being the 12th of the Hijjah, similar to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I would like to offer these advices of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The advices that Rasulullah gave in Hajjatul Wida. He gave many advices. Many advices he gave. And not only that, the advices that he gave, there are so many, inshallah, maybe we'll do multiple series on this, but at least today I wanted to briefly mention some of the advices that Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam he advised the Ummah about. And so the first advice that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam he advised the Ummah, he says that he advised about the sanctity of Muslim. In a lengthy hadith where he asks, which day are we in? Which month are we in? Which city are we in? And each time the Sahaba, they said, Allah and His Messenger know best. Meaning they don't want to respond because they don't know how Rasulullah will respond. So they don't respond. Of course they know the day, of course they know the month, of course they know where they are, but they don't respond. And they say, Allah and His Messenger know best. And after brief silence, brief pause after each one, he says that this is the day of Arafah, this is the month of Hajj, this is the Haram. And then he says, Inna dima'akum amwalakum haramun alaykum. He says that your blood and your wealth is haram upon you, meaning on one another. Meaning it's haram for another Muslim to take the blood or to take the wealth of another. It's haram, it's completely permissible. And he said that كَحُرْمَةِ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا فِي شَهْرِكُمْ هَذَا فِي بَلَدِكُمْ هَذَا. He says that just as you understand the significance of this day, you understand the significance of this month, you understand the significance of this city. Similarly, or more so, the blood and the wealth of an individual is more sacred. So this is the first advice of Rasulullah that he wanted to convey to us about how important it is to preserve each and every single life. As I mentioned many times before, that Islam gives so much importance to life that in Sharia you find many ahkam are overlooked. If not all ahkam are overlooked when it comes to the matter of life. When it comes to matters of life and death, a person can say even kufri statements, a person can do kufri things, a person can eat haram things, a person can consume haram drinks, and so on and so forth. Right? Haram medication becomes halal for them, and so on. Why? Because it's a matter of life and death. Haram things become halal because of the importance of life. That's how much importance Sharia and Allah Ta'ala gives to life. We must understand, first is life. Life is very sacred and life is very important. And we must understand the sacredness and the importance of life. All life. All life. And as we mentioned recently in our tafsir, that Allah Ta'ala, He says that the person who kills one person, the person who kills one person unjustly, it's as if he has killed all of humanity. The person who saves one person, it's as if he has saved all of humanity. We understand these things. Same thing goes with wealth. Rasulullah says, you cannot usurp the money of others. Be very careful. There are many unfortunate people who take other people's monies and use them in the wrong manner. Whether it's families, sometimes we find the distribution of inheritance is not done properly. You're taking other people's wealth. There are many ways that people do this. One is cheating, one is lying, that's in its place. But another is these forms of also usurping other people's wealth, especially family. There's even more punishment for that. Nonetheless, the sacredness of life and money. That's one. The first advice, and we'll move quickly. The second advice is the cancellation of riba. So Rasulullah goes on to say that he says that all interest-bearing wealth are now cancelled. So that all riba, all money that would bring interest, that's all cancelled now. You can now take the principal amount. That way you are not oppressing anyone and you are not being oppressed. Why? Because generally people borrow money out of need, out of want and greed. Nowadays maybe, but at least back in the day, people would not borrow wealth unless it was out of desperation and need. And so therefore Sharia said you cannot take advantage of people's desperation. That people are desperate, so now you're going to charge them. And now conventional finances may tell you that that's the way to make money. If you want to make money, you have to do this. But Islam is not only about making money. Our lives are not only selfish lives. We're only concerned about making money and profiting off other people's misfortunes. That's not how Islam works. Islam is not about profiting off other people's misfortunes. And so therefore we have to understand. And so Rasulullah says that لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. You do not oppress and you are not oppressed. When we abolish this interest. And so interest is such an important conversation. Oftentimes we look down or we ignore it. We think it's not that big of a deal. Whereas we have to understand how significant this is. We understand in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala wages war against the individual who involves themselves with interest. Why would you willingly do that? Why would you willingly wage war against Allah and His Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? There's no way. As for the hadith, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in the hadith, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he curses the person who consumes riba, the person who writes riba, the person who's a witness to riba. Any aspect involving riba, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam cursed them. Now, why would we involve ourselves with that? Now, we may think to ourselves, to be successful at modern technologies and modern finance institutions, they'll tell you that you have to involve an interest. You want to make money, you have to invest in this. You want to make money, you want to be successful, you have to put in this savings account. Why are you allowing your money to go to waste? Put it in the savings account and so on. This is what they tell you. The fact is that what this is harming the others who are in need. This is harming and abusing those who are vulnerable. And many of us, we think to ourselves that why is it that we're not successful? Why is it that we're not happy? Why is it that we're not prosperous? How can you be prosperous when you're waging war against Allah Ta'ala? How can that be that you're waging war against Allah and Rasulullah and then you're thinking that I will be happy and I'll be successful? How can that be? And then what happens? Muslims, we always look, unfortunately, we look for excuses, right? To justify our actions. We look for excuses to justify our actions. So we say, oh, it's the same. It's the same. As Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, they say that riba and wealth are the same. Whereas Allah Ta'ala has made transactions halal and has made riba haram. So there is a difference. There definitely is a difference. Although to us it seems to be the same, right? If you look at the end result, it may be the same. And I'm not going to go into detail, but to give you examples, right? But if you look at it, the end result may be the same. But the process is what's matters. It's what's important. What matters. Right? So anyways, going back, I won't spend too much time on this. But understand the importance of not involving ourselves in riba. Oftentimes we make the excuses that, it's the same, the end result is the same, or we're paying more sometimes. Wouldn't you want to pay more just to not anger Allah Ta'ala? Wouldn't you want to pay more not to bring on the wrath of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Of course. So no matter, and then of course we have limitations. Yes, we have. Yes, living in a non-Muslim country, of course you will have limitations. We think that we'll come in this non-Muslim country, we'll live here, and then everything will be according to Sharia. How can that be? If you want to live every day according to Sharia, then we have to go somewhere else. If you're living in this non-Muslim country, you have to abide by all the rules and regulations that they have. So of course, these Sharia compliant, quote unquote, Islamic institutions, yes, they will have limitations. They do have limitations. I'm not being paid to say this, of course. Right? I'm not being financially compensated in saying this. The only reason I'm saying this is for our benefit. So we have to understand that yes, there are limitations. Yes, these institutions, yes, they may not be perfect. But why would you choose the one that is definitely haram? We know that definitely interest is haram. So why would you go towards that? What do? We search for that one person, that one random individual will say that, yeah, it's okay. You can take one house on riba, it's okay. Allah will only be angry with you for a little bit. How can you say this? Oh yeah, it's okay for one house, it's okay. It's darura. Many times people say, yeah, it's darura. Right? They say all of these different things. Whereas the reality is it's not darura. It's not a need. You can move somewhere else, live somewhere else, you can do something else. It's not a darura in terms of life and death. That's a case of life and death. Nonetheless, we understand that interest is something that's completely permissible. And there's no doubt about this. And so all of us, again, we have to do our due diligence. Find out what's halal, find out what's haram. And then at least we go towards the ones that are less, right, that have less probability of being haram. We go towards the ones that are less likelihood to be haram. Of course, as I mentioned, with the limitations. But nonetheless, going back to this advice of the Prophet ﷺ, after he says that riba is haram, then what does he say? He says that I begin with the family. up. He said, وَرِبَا الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ مَوْضُوعٌ. He says, the riba of jahiliyyah, the riba of the time of ignorance is forgiven, or it's cancelled. وَأَوَّلُ رِبًا أَضَعَهُ رِبَانَا. He said, the first riba which I cancel is our riba. He said, the first riba which we cancel is our riba. Riba Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. He said, the riba, the interest of Abbas, his uncle. He said that I will cancel his interest first. Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, people owed him money, and he would charge interest, of course. And so Rasulullah spoke to him, and then he himself, he waived it. He waived this interest, he waived all of it. And not only did he waive the interest, but he also waived the principal amount as well. Rasulullah says, not only is Abbas's interest waived, but also the principal amount is waived. Imagine hundreds of thousands of dollars probably. Hundreds of thousands of gold coins at that time. He just canceled all of it. He says, you know what? All of it is in charity. We spoke a few months ago. We spoke about the virtue of loaning people money, and not only loaning, but possibly canceling the debt that people owe to you if you have the financial ability to do so. Right? But nonetheless, one very important rule we understand from here, which is that when a person is advising others, then he should begin and he should first ensure that his own family, he and his family are practicing on it first. When someone is advising someone else, you should make sure that you are practicing on it first. Your family is practicing on it first. And then you'll have more impact when you tell others. Now, yes, I'm not saying that this is not about halal haram. I'm not saying that you cannot advise others. But I'm saying that it's better, it's more impactful when you practice on it first and then advise others. So this is very important. As we see from the Prophet ﷺ lifestyle, every single time he would practice on it and then he would tell others. And so what do? We tell our kids that you should pray salah, go pray your salah, go read the Quran. So what do? We don't read Quran, we don't pray our salah. Allah Ta'ala forgive us. That's the unfortunate reality, right? That we tell our kids to pray, but we're not praying. So what happens? We tell them to read Quran, but we don't read Quran. How do we expect the kids to be obedient? How do we expect the kids to understand the importance of salah, understand the importance of Quran? If we're constantly looking for leeways, we're constantly looking for ways out, we're constantly adopting the way that would allow us to not do the good things, and we're constantly adopting the evil path, unfortunately. What can we expect from our kids? So going back, this is the second advice of the Prophet ﷺ, that riba is cancelled, riba is haram. Moving on, because we're short on time. The next advice of Rasulullah ﷺ is to stay away from obedience to shaitan. He says, "Ala inna shaitan qad aisa an yu'bada fi baladikum hadha abada." The shaitan has now become despondent from you all worshipping him in this land. Then shaitan has become despondent of him doing clear kufr. Clear kufr, shaitan has now become despondent of it. Someone comes to you and says, worship this idol. You say no. But then someone else said, oh look, then he says, Rasulullah says, وَلَكِنْ سَيَكُونُ لَهُ طَاعَةٌ فِي بَعْضِ مَا تَحْتَقِرُونَ مِنْ أَعْمَالِكُمْ فَيَرْضَى بِهَا. So he said that by shaitan will convince you to do certain things that you will consider as insignificant. You will consider this to be insignificant. You will not consider, oh, this is not such a big deal. In another hadith, Rasulullah says, the munafiq sees sins like a fly, he swats it away, he doesn't care about it. Whereas the believer, he considers it like a mountain. This is not just any minor sin, but this is a sin against Allah Ta'ala. We should not look at the sin, but we should look at that individual, or that being that we're sinning against. We're sinning against Allah Ta'ala. So therefore, we should be concerned. So going on. The second is to refrain from obedience to shaitan. Be very careful. Never look down on us, or never belittle a single sin. Oh, this is just a minor sin. Or this is just a sin, I will ask for forgiveness later. Don't do that. You never know if Allah Ta'ala will give me or you the tawfiq to make tawbah or not. Who knows? Maybe Allah Ta'ala will not give us tawfiq to make tawbah. And that Allah Ta'ala holds us accountable for that one sin. Now, why did you do this? In another hadith, there's so much to speak about. In another hadith, Rasulullah says that every single person has the possibility of being forgiven for their sins, except the one who exposes his sins, except the one who exposes his own sins. That Allah Ta'ala concealed his sins, and then the next day he goes and says, I did this, I did that. So many of us, unfortunately, in our families, this TikTok generation, Snapchat, Instagram generation that we're in now, where our kids are now posting their entire lives on Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok. The most disgusting things, the most vile things, the worst of things. Yes, dunyawi, it has harms. Later on, they think that this will not harm them. Definitely it will harm them. When it comes to job searching and so on, and they pull up all of these records of their TikToks and whatever else comments that they need on Facebook and so on, this will have an impact. As parents, you have to teach them the importance. Teach them how impactful these videos and these messages can have on their lives. But more so in terms of akhirah. You can delete it on TikTok, but you will not delete it from your a'mal until and unless you do tawbah. So be very careful what you post. So many people, they have these haram things posted, and then what? They pass away. They have a haram, let's say they have some haram videos posted, and then they pass away. And all the people who keep watching that haram, they're constantly receiving the sins of that in their graves. Imagine that. Being in the graves and continuously earning sins. Why? Because of something you posted online. Because you were the reason other people did sins. You were the cause of other people's sins. Therefore, we need to be very careful, especially when it comes to our sins, and allowing shaitan to win. No one is perfect. I'm not perfect, you're not perfect. But don't expose your sins. And don't justify. Never expose and never justify. Never just, you're doing haram, that's it. Between you and Allah, Ya Allah, I know what I'm doing is haram. Ya Allah, give me the tawfiq to do tawbah. But once you say, you know what, but XYZ, you know what, maybe, you know what, everyone is doing it, and so on and so forth, that's when we've fallen. That's when we have dropped so low. Right? So be very careful, never justify and never expose. Moving on quickly. There's so much to speak about. Rasulullah, we spoke about the rights of the husbands and wives. Allah, he says that fear Allah Ta'ala in relationship to the spouses, right? Because of course Allah Ta'ala he has entrusted the spouses to you, and so on and so forth. He speaks about the rights of husbands and wives. And then finally we'll conclude here. There's a lot more to speak about, but Rasulullah, the famous part of the Hajj al-Wida that we generally know of, what is the abolishing of superiority. Anyone thinking that they're better than anyone else. Rasulullah abolished all of that. And he was, in history, he was the first person to abolish this. The first public figure to ever cancel this. And to say that there's no virtue of Arab over non-Arab, or non-Arab over Arab, or black over white, or white over black. There's no virtue of anyone over anyone else, except through taqwa. Right? So this is the mi'yar, this is the standard. Taqwa is the standard. And taqwa is something that we cannot see. You cannot see how much taqwa I have. I cannot see how much taqwa you have. But the fact is that each person's relationship with Allah Ta'ala is different. So we cannot judge the next person. We cannot think that we're better than others. Whenever we look at others, we should always think that the next person is better than me. If someone is older than me, I think that they did better and they did more good deeds than I did. If someone is younger than me, I think that they did less sins than me. If someone is non-Muslim, I think that these non-Muslims, if they accept Islam, they will be better Muslims than me. They'll start with a clean slate. So therefore, they'll be better Muslims than me. So this is the reality. This is how you and I should think. We should consider these are the beautiful teachings of Islam. And these are some of the teachings which Rasulullah imparted on Hajj al-Wida, and his farewell Hajj. He passed away about 80 days after this. It's such an important event. And every time, in many different hadith, he asks, Ala hal ballaghtu? Have I conveyed my message? And the Sahaba said, Ballagh, that you have conveyed the message. Rasulullah was so concerned about conveying this message. Then he said, he said, those who are present should tell those who are absent. Meaning he knew that 100,000 is not, it's just the minimum. It's just the beginning. There a time now we have billions of Muslims. But what? We have billions of people who claim to be Muslims, but not many practicing Islam. This is very important that we need to practice Islam. But to understand Islam is perfect, Muslims are not. Yes, that's there. Islam is perfect, Muslims are not. At the same time, we need to work towards being better Muslims. We need to work towards practicing Islam in a better manner. Right? And just as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked, Allah al-ballagtu, did I convey the message? Similarly, we ask the same, Allah al-ballagtu. And each one of us, we should convey to the others that this is what's necessary, this is what we should do, and this is what we should avoid. May Allah Ta'ala give me, may Allah Ta'ala give us all the things to understand and practice.